Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
Every year we do a two-part series with our colleagues from North Idaho College on what we call Book Talk. It's been very popular, and our four guests read extensively throughout the year, particularly in the summertime, and then we bring those books to you, and a lot of you want to read those books. Today's program is particularly a special moment for us. It is a pause in time and another milestone for our North Idaho College Public Forum in its 33rd year. Today's program is our 1,600th program, 1,600 weekly programs. It takes 33 years to do that, and we're so glad you're here to help us celebrate our 1,600th show, because all of you have been so supportive over those years. Welcome to the program. First of all is Denise Clark, who is known as an outstanding librarian. In fact, I call her the walking encyclopedia. Only once in 16 years have I known about a book she didn't know about, and I celebrate that too extensively when it finally happened. And next to her is Dr. Virginia Tinsley Johnson, who's the chair of the North Idaho College Department of Communications and Fine Arts, and I'm also always proud to say that Dr. Johnson was chosen as the faculty member of the year United States-wide with community colleges a few years ago. And then the third person that I am so proud of is Fran Barr, who is on the English faculty at North Idaho College and does many, many wonderful things and is just an extensive reader, as is our fourth guest, Annie McKinley, who is in the speech department of the speech faculty. And all four of you are just so remarkable to talk to, and you're our intellects at North Idaho College, and we're so proud of you. This week we're dealing with, last week we dealt with nonfiction, and this week it's fiction. And there's so much delightful reading in that area. And Denise, we're going to start with you this time. We rotate around differently, and these are only samples of things you've read, but why don't you tell us about a couple of the books you've read this summer on fiction?
I'm going to start with one titled Emma Brown. And Emma Brown it's a novel from the unfinished manuscript by Charlotte Bronte. Now, Charlotte Bronte only wrote 2 chapters of this work before she died, and it was shoved in a bureau and discovered after her death. And for all of you out there who love Victorian novels, and you've read all your Dickens and all your Bronte and all your Trollope, and you think perhaps that you are finished reading Victoria. You've read them all. There's nothing else available to you. You've even worked, down to minor authors like George Gissing. There is a fun work out here for you. It's Emma Brown, and I enjoyed this thoroughly. I could not tell. It's finished by Claire Boylan, and I could not tell when Claire Boylan picked up after the 2 chapters written by Charlotte Bronte and finished the novel. She has captured that voice and that flavor of the Victorian novel. And of course, it's a page turner. We have a mysterious young woman in a provincial English school who's been dropped off by a mysterious gentleman. And so the characters in the novel spend much of their time trying to discern the identity of this young woman. So there are many plot twists and turns, and a look at Victorian society high and very low. So you run the gamut here in Emma Brown. So I can't recommend it too highly. It's very well written. And
how about a second book, and then we'll come back if we have time.
The second book I would like to mention is one by Leslie Forbes. It's called Waking Raphael. I love detective fiction. I like mysteries, but I tend to like my mysteries a little more what I call kind of the literary mysteries. So our main character here is an art restoration specialist who's working on a painting by Raphael called La Muta, the Mute, and she's in Urbino, Italy. And there is, she encounters a mute woman living in a pile of rubble that was a small village outside of Urbino. But what has happened? There seems to have been something that occurred sometime in the countryside in Italy during the past that she wants to get to the bottom of, and it's something pretty horrific. So what is it? So we follow our art restorer, Charlotte Penton, through the Italian countryside as she tries to get to the bottom of restore Raphael's mute, learn more about the woman who is a mute living in this, pile of rubble and what has occurred. So, I don't want to give it away. She is a fine writer. I'm reading Bombay Ice by her, another murder mystery, a literary murder mystery. You can learn everything you ever wanted to know about Bollywood. So if you like Indian films.
Virginia, we must turn to you now on a couple of your books.
Okay, well, last week I was on an international jaunt, and so I decided to continue on that with a couple of my books. The first one I want to talk about is one that was actually the Costco Book Club selection, and since I always have to look at all the books in Costco, even though my husband declares we already have a book when he's standing by me there, I found The Rice Mother by Rani Manika. And this is a first-time novel for her, and it's just a fascinating book. Takes place in Malaysia, begins in Ceylon, with a woman who is taken away to Malaysia to live with a man who ostensibly is very wealthy, but it turns out is really very poor. And it's told from her point of view, and then she has 7 children, twins, a boy and a girl, and then several others, and her grandchildren and her great-granddaughter. So we see her from the angle of all these people over time as they live in Malaysia, and a good portion of the book takes place with the Japanese invasion and some really pretty horrifying results of that.
Maybe we have just time for one quote from one passage.
Her daughter-in-law writes about her. In fact, her own daughter calls her, that is Lakshmi, the rice mother, the one who is kind of the earth mother. But her daughter-in-law isn't quite so charmed by her. She says, in fact, "I curse the day that black widow spider, my mother-in-law, came into our house spinning her silken lies. Like strings of silver they flowed out of her terrible mouth and caught me struggling in their web. The truth is, between them, they all forced me to marry Lakshman." That's the son. "Before he came into my life, I had doctors, lawyers, engineers, and even a London-trained brain surgeon who came to ask for my hand in marriage, but it was I who hesitated. Spoiled for choice, I managed to find imperfection in all of them. A crooked nose, too short, too skinny, too something. In my dreams, I had seen a prince, tall, fair, good-looking, and rich. I thought patience was a virtue. Finally, look what I got."
And your second book?
The second book is one that actually one of the other librarians here at North Idaho College recommended, entitled When the Elephants Dance, another first novel by Tess Uriza Holta, who is lives in California, but she is a Filipino-American. And I thought this is another book with several narrators. This is another World War II book and takes place in the Philippines, and it's part of a story about a family that's pretty well trapped in a basement of a home, and yet there's another character who's a sort of freedom fighter in it, and they somewhat save their sanity and find out about each other through these almost mystical stories that they tell about their past. And so interwoven between what's going on in the Second World War are stories about them and how they came to be, and sort of dispelling what people think about them with stories about their lives. The first chapter tells where the title comes from. Papa explains the war like this: when the elephants dance, the chickens must be careful. The great beasts, as they circle one another, shaking the trees and trumpeting loudly, are the Americanos and the Japanese as they fight. And our Philippine Islands, we are the small chickens. I think of baby chicks I can hold in the palm of my hand, flapping wings that are not yet grown, and I am frightened.
Thank you. Now to Annie, and Annie, you have a couple of books there too.
I have a couple of books, and I kind of like, as Virginia, I kind of picked a theme this time. I decided to go with a couple of collection of short stories. Because as we talked about last week about where do you find time to read and having lots of different books going, I kind of like short stories. I used to not. I used to say, oh, you just get attached to the character and they're gone. But now I kind of enjoy them because, especially with very good writers like these two, they've developed them and they're quick reads, but you still satisfying reads. And the one that I enjoyed just recently was Interpreter of the Maladies, and I'll mispronounce this author's name, I'm sure, Humpa Lahira. Is that his name? This is also the author of Namesake, which is also real popular right now. This particular collection of short stories was the winner of the Pulitzer Prize, and and she's from India, I want to say. So most of her stories have that flair, international flair. I should talk about the one that was intriguing is a lot of them are very intriguing, but one of the stories that I'll share talking about today is the one that the title of the book comes from. And this particular one is about a taxi cab driver, and he takes people to this particular temple to see the monkeys. And so he's taking his family, and it's obviously the mother really doesn't want to go, and she's kind of a prima donna, and she doesn't really want to go, but the kids want to go, and the husband wants to go because they're in this particular place, and you must go to this temple. So they go, it's a hot day and everything, and so she stays, they take his picture, and then he says, he goes, here, give me your address so I can mail you the picture when we get home. And so they stay back and they talk, and she shares some very intimate secrets with him. And then the family comes back, and when son's been attacked by the monkeys, and she says, oh, poor Bobby, Mrs. Doss said, come here a second, let Mommy fix your hair. Again, she reached into a straw bag, at this time for a hairbrush, and began to run it around the edges of its translucent visor. When they whipped out the hairbrush, the slip of paper with Mr. Kopeski's address on it fluttered away in the wind. No one but Mr. Kopeski noticed. He watched it as it rose, carried higher and higher by the breeze into the trees where some monkey now sat, solemnly observing the scene below. And Mr. Kopeski observed it too, knowing it was the only picture of the Doss family he would preserve in his mind forever.
Oh, interesting, powerful. How about a second book?
The second one was one actually I've read a ways back, but I still just love her writing, and it's Alice Munro's collection of short stories, Hateship, Friendship, Courtship, Loveship, and Marriage. And she is probably, I think the panelists here would agree, one of the classic short story writers of our time. And she, again, just captures in 10 to 20 pages a story that, again, makes you laugh, makes you cry, and I enjoy her work, too.
Very good. Yeah. Now, Fran, you have two books there that you're going to talk about.
All right. Well, just to break the international theme pattern, I will get back to it, though, if we have time. I found a book called Breaking Clean by Judy Blunt. It's really a memoir, but it reads like a fiction, and it's the winner of the she won the Whiting Writers Award and the Penn Jarrett Fund Award. And this is her first novel, and it is stunning. And the thing I like about it is that it's set in northern Montana, and it takes place, I would say in the 40s, 50s, 1940s, 1950s. And she and her family had homesteaded land up there, and I guess it must be the most barren, frigid, hard-scrabble place to live that anybody could live. And they were really tough people. And her dad actually arranged a marriage for her with an older neighbor man, and didn't really even ask her whether she wanted to or not. They just kind of worked it out. But what really appealed to me the description is just stunning, but I grew up on a farm in a rather rough part of the world too, and so much of it was right on. And there's one story or one section where she talks about a snowstorm that was absolutely unbelievable. It just buried all of their livestock, cattle in particular. And she talked about how they tried to put things back together after the storm. And so they managed to pull some of the cattle into the barn, got them so they were still living, and they had calves, and they were hoping that they would bear these calves before they died. And there's just a little description here of that. It's just so incredible. Her dad says, "One thing I learned, and that's for God's sake, don't ever." He pauses, searching for words, his eyes grim or sad, then starts over. "If you have a froze-up critter, shoot 'em or haul them off or something. Get rid of 'em. It's cruel." And then he describes the cattle giving birth. He says, the range cows gave birth that spring in the stench of decay, their tails gone, ear tips dried crisp, ready to fall. A few stood to wash their calves, murmuring and anxious, with milk pouring from them, milk streaming down their hocks, pulling around their feet, draining from the holes in their udders where the teats had been. The cattle didn't even have feet, many of them. I mean, they just had
That's
stubs.
so descriptive, isn't it?
It's absolutely powerful.
And you have a second book.
I do. This one is absolutely wonderful. It's called Kissing the Virgin's Mouth, and it's written by Donna Gersten, who lived in Mexico for many years and ran a fitness center. It's another first novel. I can't believe these women write these novels. It's the winner of the Bellwether Prize for Fiction. And her main character is Guadalupe Magdalena Molina Vasquez, who is this young child brought up in the barrio. They're desperately poor, and her father runs a taco cart. I think he sells gorditas, actually. And he just can't ever seem to make enough money to feed the family, and they're starving. So anyway, she decides she's going to do it because he's off with his mistress, and nobody's making money. So she goes out, and she makes the gorditas, takes them out when she's 14 years old, and makes a pile of money, comes home, and this is how she's welcomed. Inside my house, I spilled the pesos into the lap of my mother. The heavy coins pooled in her skirt and sagged between her legs. I could hear Abuelito, that's her grandfather, yelling himself ronca, his voice dying, growling every bad name there was for a woman. Ladrona, malinquista, puta, thief, traitor, devil. Thank you, Hia, my mom spoke quietly under the noise of Abuelito. I kneeled beside her chair, and she scooped and held coins in her double palms. Then a minute later, you must, Hia, this is her mother, you must, Hia, apologize to your grandfather and to your father and to your brothers. Apologize? I pressed my cheek harder into her thigh, trying not to speak. Apologize? I wanted to pierce her dull thigh with one fingernail, to sink my teeth deep through colored cotton, through her flesh to the bone. She can't believe she should apologize, but she has shamed her father and her grandfather. And she goes on to become a mistress. She has a long-term affair with a drug dealer, and finally marries a professor at the University of Idaho in Moscow. It all falls apart, and she goes back to Mexico, and that's the story. It is a wonderful, wonderful story. You must read it.
It's very, again, the use of the language by the authors is very powerful. Denise, we fortunately have more time, and you have a third book, and so we're going to go to that book, and then you also, I haven't read from one of them yet, and so this is great for our viewers to hear from the actual passages.
Well, maybe I'll read a little bit from this one, because Cynthia Ozick is really one of my favorite authors, and I think she's probably one of the finest women writing in this country now, contemporary women writers. This is about probably the third work of hers I've read, and I have never been disappointed by Ozick, and it certainly wasn't by this one. It's called Heir to the Glimmering World. It's a novel about a refugee family from Germany who arrive in the United States about the mid-30s. Our main character is Herr Professor Mitweiser, and his wife. His wife is a famous physicist. He studies he's become the world's expert on a very small and extinct religious sect. and said probably one of the only people who've done much scholarship on this small religious sect. They have come after just a horrendous experience in Germany. They've finally arrived in the States. They are trying to find themselves in a strange culture. And a woman by the name of Rose Meadows, sort of takes them under her wing. She becomes, she needs desperately a place to stay, and she becomes kind of a nurse to the wife who has really lost her bearings in this country. And there are many children, there are about 5 of them, I believe, and also a typist for the professor as he does his research at the New York Public Library, continues his research. How do they survive, though, in this country? That none of them have jobs. They could bring nothing with them out of Germany except a few family mementos. So they have been, they're funded by a rather strange young man whose name is James Heir. And James Heir has inherited lots of money. He is based on the Christopher Robin character out of the Pooh books. Now, James Heir must grow up hauling this baggage behind him of being this little boy, you know, who was painted by his father and written about by his mother. And this is what he has. This is a description of this. When this happened, he was 5 then. And when he was 6, 2 bad things crept in. He stopped being Jimmy because all the people who were reading the stories to their children, these are the Bear books, the James Bear books, and there were thousands of them, his mother said, had begun to think of him as the A Bear Boy, which got to be the Bear Boy. And the second bad thing was that he had to go to school and learn to read. In school, everyone called him the Bear Boy, as if he was a stuffed animal you took to bed, or as if he was exactly the same as the pictures his father made and not a real boy at all. Also, there was a third bad thing. He did learn to read, and when he was 7, by then half a dozen of his father's storybooks had arrived from the publisher. He could read them himself, and he hated them because his father in the books was naming him the Bear Boy, and he felt, and he was right, that he would never be Jimmy again. He would have to be the Bear Boy in buckled shoes and long bangs and flounced collars all the rest of his life, like a Raggedy Andy doll that never changed its clothes. Toys were nothing to him now. He had heaps of toys. He had trains and a dozen large and small Raggedy Andys, and trucks and cars, and a wooden milk wagon with a wooden horse to pull it, and a fort filled with lead soldiers in different uniforms and an Indian tent. For a little while he even had a dollhouse. It was the only toy he truly cared for. And he was ashamed of his knees. Now, his father, would put rouge on his knees. So when he painted him, he would have these little rosy knees. So we have a young man who has fallen in with his family, is trying to find a place and trying to escape his identity, who becomes a part of this growing, lost family. Everyone in this book is lost in some way, shape, form.
Virginia, you have one more book.
I do, and this time I chose a classic. This was when Oprah decided to resuscitate her book club. The first book that she chose is this classic, Carson McCullers' book, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. And it's a book that I think I read in high school and hadn't read since then, and was chosen to do a book talk about it last summer. And just it's totally underlined and highlighted and so forth because it's just such a rich book, and I hadn't remembered that it was. I did go on a Carson McCullers kick then and read everything I could by her. But I thought I'd just, again, it's that there seems to be a theme here of a story told from different points of view and about different characters. And talking about lost, one of the main themes through this book is about being lonesome. And just the heart being a lonely hunter, always seeking some way to make connections. And ironically, one of the main characters is a deaf mute named Mr. Singer, who is kind of the sounding board for all these characters who go to him and tell their troubles to him. And all he wants is to be with his own friend who has been locked up in a mental institution. And so we learn a lot about racial relationships really in the early when was this book written? 1940. So it's way ahead of its time in studying racial relationships. There's one of the main characters who is a black minister who is really frustrated because he wishes for his children to be intellectuals, and he's striven to do that, and yet he has really no love himself, and so they are not intellectuals like him, and he's always seeking to help his people, but he's inarticulate about that. So the book about these racial relationships and the young girl who is seeking to better herself and loves music but can't afford a piano, and who ends up in the story having to work at a Woolworths and never being able to really live out her dreams. And she wrote this book when she was about 20 years old. It's just amazing to think about.
Do we have a passage from that?
I do have a short one here, Tony. It's oops, I lost my bookmark out of there. It's, oh dear, sorry, I think I lost the place I was going to read. Here's just a passage about one of the sons of this minister that I talked to you about. Dr. Copeland was his name, and his son has been in a fight. Dr. Copeland drew his shawl closer around him. Is he dead? That boy too mean to die. He in the hospital, but he going to be out and again making trouble before long. And William, the police come in and taken him to the jail in Black Maria. He's still locked up. And did he not get hurt? Oh, he got a busted eye and a little chunk cut out of his behind, but it won't bother him none. What I can't understand is how come he would be messing around with that love. She at least 10 shades blacker than I is, and she the ugliest nigger I ever seen. She walk like she have an egg between her legs and don't want to break it. She ain't even clean. And here Willie done cut the buck like his over her. And, you know, the language is now probably what we would consider politically incorrect. But at the time, Carson McCullers, is writing to try to capture the way that the people spoke at that time, and their concerns about color, shades of color, and so forth. And it's kind of an interesting slice out of life at that time, and still some of the themes are really strong for us.
It shows how far we've progressed in relation to sensitivity and language,
right.
Which that's there.
Yes.
The other thing that's in these books that I see so much in this fiction is that even though it's fiction, they really portray life in the sense that, like someone, in this case, a character who didn't get to have her dreams fulfilled,
right.
She had to have a life different from what she wanted. And that's one of the tragedies in life, is that people don't oftentimes realize their dreams. I have to say on behalf of our staff to all of you that you're very special, and you bring such excitement to our program, and you're going beyond the walls of our college to share with others what they could read. And so every year we get very good response, and so I hope we've helped you viewers to find some things that you'd like to read, and many, many things that we did not talk about that time would not permit, but these are some samples from that. I hope you'll be with us again next week, and we'll move to yet another issue. And we're very proud to close our 1600th program out. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.